Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Late Winner Show. I have Adam today to discuss all things football from all over the world. We have a packed show today. We are going to discuss about Serie A, Bundesliga, and some Premier League action as well. We won't just want to cover that in the pod today as well. But Adam, welcome back again to the Late Winner Show. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me back. Absolute honor to be back as well. Doing really well. So thank you very much. Yeah, great to talk about Serie A as well as the Bundesliga to give the average fan a bit more knowledge about those leagues because it's certainly been fascinating in Serie A. Yeah, cannot wait to discuss a lot more.
Definitely. Before we do, start the podcast. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to the Late Winner Show. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter as well for some, great content that we've been doing. I at least I feel that we've been doing good content. So I hope our viewers do that same, do that too. But also just to let our viewers know who are watching this video live as well. This podcast is also going to be available as an audio by tomorrow. So do give us a follow there as well if you're into listening to audio podcasts on your favorite streaming platform. But yeah, let's start with Serie A. I think the one team that we definitely wanted to touch on is Napoli, right? I think
Mm,
Osimhen, which is their striker, he has been flying, and Spalletti, like, believe it or not, he's doing an extraordinary job at
yeah.
Napoli. I for one never believed that Napoli would be even in the running for top four. When the Serie A started, just based on like how Napoli have been, but I guess they've been with 10 wins, one draw, and that was against Roma. But the question is obviously, can Napoli keep it up until the end of the season? Because we have already
Mm,
experienced this before when they had a flying start against under Maurizio Sarri in 2017, but only to eventually lose that title at the end to Juventus, who was probably one of the most dominating teams in Italy at the moment. But what do you feel about Napoli? Are they actually good enough, or is this just this momentum that they're carrying into these games?
Well, no, I'd say Napoli are definitely the real deal. I think you're right to call back a bit of context in terms of how the season started. So, obviously, off the back of last season, they sacked Gennaro Gattuso.
Mhm.
Had a really good season by all accounts, and the style of football was very gung ho at times. Very interesting, never dull moment, especially with Gattuso in charge, right? But I think there was a lot of doubts about his credentials, and I think he did really well considering the circumstances, the amount of abuse he got as well. He managed to get them a at least top six finish, which, given the circumstances, you'd go, yeah, what was Napoli fans really expecting? But there is this high expectation with Napoli and their fan base. I think what probably let them down was the fact that they didn't have the squad to an extent. Now, this season, they've really pushed on, as you've rightly called it, new coach in charge. He's had a few new players at his disposal as well. So the likes of Anguissa, for example, that was a bit of an unknown at the beginning of the season, obviously on loan from Fulham, doing really well, really
Mhm.
amazingly well. But yeah, obviously the big man is Osimhen. He's having a phenomenal season, building on, I suppose, the kind of early murmurs that we saw him in the French league, and he's brought it into Serie A now. And I think he's been very critical in terms of the goal contributions, because whereas before it used to be Dries Mertens, for example, and Insigne, actually there is now more of a reliance on the likes of Osimhen. I think what you will find, though, and this is something that we talk about on our podcast, is around the fact that the AFCOM is going to be here around the corner. That is going to be absolutely monumental for Napoli. Now, they're probably hoping, should I say, that a lot of their African based players have a very early termination in terms of group stages and come back to Napoli as soon as possible. So we're talking about Anguissa, we're talking about Koulibaly, and we're talking about Osimhen as well. So those three are pretty much pivotal to the success of Napoli. Obviously, we can't go without saying the likes of Piotr Zielinski, for example, is going to be critical during that period. What you find also, there's this different dynamic that's happened in the last 2 weeks with the contract talks of Insigne, for
Mhm.
example. So it's rumored that FC Toronto are trying to persuade him and his family to join the MLS. And obviously, before that happens, there was murmurs about Insigne talking about he hasn't been offered a very good contract. So what he means by that is it's on worse pay than he's currently on, which is
Right.
weird when you think about the wealth of some of these Italian teams. But you've got a bonkers chairman at Napoli, and I think what you're finding here is they're trying to force the hands to kind of get him on reduced terms. But equally, we saw the treatment of Arkadiusz Milik, who went on to Marseille. Do you know what? I could see Insigne leaving Napoli by the end of the season, potentially. But that said, I mean, we cannot take away what could be achieved this season. I'm sure Lorenzo Insigne will definitely be trying his best to make sure that they actually are in a chance to win the Scudetto. And yeah, I would definitely recommend people, if they haven't watched Napoli, definitely watch a few of their games, even if it's just a few highlights, because yeah, they've been really turning it on. They've been really solid at the back, but more importantly, they've been very attacking, creative at the same time. And that's just, sentiment to the coach himself. So obviously, yeah, Spalletti's got this reputation of winding people up. We saw what he did with Totti at Roma in his last season. And yeah, Spalletti is a madman. He is
Yeah.
a literal madman, but he gets success. He gets the best out of players. And it could be argued that Spalletti actually got the best out of the Roma squad for the last 10 years. I mean, Roma haven't done well since he left. So, yeah, very good moods or vibes in Napoli right now. But it is going to be critical during that January period around what happens with AFCON, and hoping those players return very quickly to Napoli and help them progress in the Serie A for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're. I would agree that they are really really doing well in this season. As I said, I did not expect them to turn it on this much, and go
Mm,
on like a 8 match winning run. I think they started with.
yeah.
So that was like really insane. Like I was like, oh yeah, are they going to even draw a game? Because I kept watching the highlights of their games, and I really watched the game against Juventus when they were playing, and
Yeah.
they when they came back to win that game. The only and there's always these sayings in football that when you want to have a good team, you build it up from a good solid defense, and
Mm,
they've only conceded 4 goals in the 12 games that they played in Serie A. So, and they're actually doing well. It's not even like a fluke, I would say, that they're up there. They're
yeah.
actually playing well, and there are, as you said, like they're the real deal to watch out for this season. The there might be a kind of a slump coming one time, but it's just
Mm,
the only issue that I see with that is that, yeah, when they kind of have that slump, how the other teams below them are doing that, because the
mm,
Serie A table is so tight right now.
yeah.
It just feels like, yeah, you can't really go and you can't go and find any you can't afford to have any slumps
Yeah,
in the
I
Serie A.
definitely say I think the big thing for me is they might not have the quality behind the first 11. So there
Yes.
will be question marks around, whether those that will fill in the gaps for the players that do go to AFCON, can they, fill the void? There's going to be a lot of expectation on the likes of Insigne, Zielinski, for example, but also maybe Dries Mertens. What will he do? Will he come back and at least fire them to a few wins? And this is the thing. I think Napoli of old, you would expect them to go on a few games losing run and then lose position in that respect. And I think you're right to call out the other teams. What we're starting to see with, for example, with AC Milan, I think they're having a little bit of a wobble right now. Not a massive wobble, but you're starting to see signs of maybe Pioli not necessarily getting the best out of that AC Milan team now. So he's been, up until this point, being very consistent. I think he's basically got the team selections quite spot on. But what you saw in the recent Milan derby is that actually, he got a lot of those decisions wrong. And yeah, I did question how the hell Ibrahimovic lasted 90 minutes, but he did, because it was such an end-to-end game as well. But yeah, outside of that, obviously, we've got the Roma team that did really well at the beginning of this start. They've slumped. Lazio under Sarri still finding their way because, they beat Roma, but since then they haven't done very well. Juve, I mean, there's a lot to say about Juve, but we've got too much time to talk about other teams as well. Atalanta as well, another team that obviously everyone's liked in terms of an underdog, but this season, I think people are starting to question, that whole Gasparini approach right now. And then outside of that, then you do think, right, who else could go into that mix? I think, to be honest, the teams that I've mentioned are in that top 6, 7 mix right now. It's just, for me, a question of who will end in which position right now. So, yeah, very fascinating. And don't forget, we've got the likes of Fiorentina just behind them as well.
Yeah. I think let's move on to the next team, which is Juventus, right? I guess we can all say that Juventus season has not been the season that we all expected it to be.
No.
Since Ronaldo announced his departure, we all knew, I guess, even though we had done all these previews before the deadline day, before the Serie A started, and we were like, yeah, maybe Allegri coming back and Ronaldo being in the team, they're the team to beat, and they're going to recapture the Scudetto. But obviously, when you have this high profile of a player leaving Juventus at the end of the deadline day, where you don't have any player to look to replace him, they were always going to struggle. But it just felt like the season that when they started the season, it just felt like, yeah, it's not going to be this year. It definitely doesn't look like it. But it looked at one point of time that Allegri had found some kind of a tactic to go past and beat those teams. They're 4-4 in the Champions League as well. But in recent weeks, again, they've slipped. Inconsistent is the word that I'll describe Juventus this season. But what have you made of Juventus' season so far? And the most important question is, can they finish in the top 4?
I've been, I think, a bit disappointed with Allegri
Yes.
and not Juventus as such. Now, I won't take credit for this, but something my co-host Craig said on our show this week was, has Juventus actually been very good over these last few years? And you could argue, no, they haven't. And they haven't got a team. I think we all struggle to kind of see what identity that team has these days, because once upon a time, and this is something that a Juventus fan quoted, they had a really good midfield, but were a bit maybe weak up top. When they brought in Ronaldo, they had to change that, and they had a really good front line, but had a weak midfield. And now Ronaldo's gone, they've got nothing. They've got nothing going forward. So, and we'll talk about defensively as well in a bit, but again, it's an aging back line. We've got the players of like De Ligt, for example, that can't find himself in the squad. Wojciech Szczesny, I'm not his biggest fan, given my Polish ancestry. I love Poland, but even for the Poland national squad, I would not have him as my first choice goalkeeper. Going back to Juve, though, I think with Allegri, I've been disappointed in the fact that he's not really found the right blend for that team. Like Allegri teams are all about fighting, just shutting up shop, but at the same time, they would attack. They would find a move, whether that be, hitting it to the front man, set play, or, just the style of football. Right now, I lack to see that identity with his tactics, his, ethics, I suppose, of what he wants to achieve with that Juventus squad. You have to say, though, in hindsight, there is, I suppose, a number of players there that need to be shifted or moved on. And then you've got the constant murmurs of like Dybala, obviously going into his last year of contract, wanting a new contract, but he's injured right now. So is he worth it? Is that a risk for Juventus? Juventus used to be considered quite, I suppose, in terms of the money side of things, quite, strict, but always good in that marketplace. They used to be really good at clever at getting the really good talent. So we're talking about the yesteryears when they had the likes of Paratici, who used to lead with in terms of getting these kind of talents on a free transfer. So, Pirlo was bought in, Pogba was bought in, Coman, for example, they had. They've even had the likes of, Cancelo, for example, in more recent times, Romero, who's recently gone to Spurs. There's loads of examples there where they clearly have an eye for talent, but they don't seem to develop it at Juve. Now, I do question, like, what do you see in Juventus apart from Chiesa right now? Locatelli's been brought in, and he can't do it by himself. But then you do question, like, why is Allegri consistently playing Rabiot on the left-hand side of a midfield where he doesn't have a left foot? He's absolutely pants, in my opinion. He doesn't do much. I don't know how he gets in the French national squad, let alone Juve squad. And then you've got the question about Weston McKennie. Where does he actually sit? Is he a good enough midfielder? That could be an argument about Weston McKennie right now. Aaron Ramsey, for example, high wages, not being able to get a game. Again, I don't think he's good enough. But again, you've got huge dilemma. And then let's talk about the forward line. So apart from Chiesa, Morata's there. Now, Morata, he'll try his best, but he's not a goal scorer. He doesn't get you 20 plus goals a season. So again, what else have you got up top? It's a real struggle right now. And if I briefly talk about the defense, Chiellini, love him to bits. I love his shithousery. I love the fact that he likes to wind up teams and players. And you saw in recent kind of promos for the All or Nothing documentary on Juventus that it's about the fabric of Juventus. You buy into it as a club. And that's why Bonucci came back. But again, like, those two players alone, they're very old, not got the pace that they used to have. They're reliant on just being clever. And, to an extent, that will get you somewhere. But that whole defensive line as well, you kind of look at it and you got Juan Cuadrado, for example, on one side. And yeah, you think, right, how is this team ever going to evolve? And it's a huge rebuild task. And it reminds me of Man United, if I'd be brutally honest. They are the Man United of Italy right now. If they're not careful, they could fall even further behind. But somehow, they still manage to get results. And as much as I hate to say this, I think they will, by the end of the season, end up fourth. They're not going to win the title, definitely. Yeah. Let's rule that out of the equation. But somehow I just get this feeling that Atalanta will screw it up, or whoever is that third to fourth place team might slip. So yeah, fascinating to see. But I hope to God it doesn't happen, because it'd be good for Juventus, I think, to an extent, that they're not in the prime European competition, and they're actually having to rebuild. But yeah, the question is, how do they manage that transition? And is Allegri the long-term guy? Because, I mean, we're talking about some talented coaches abroad as well right now. So Erik ten Hag, for example, is rebuilding something at Ajax right now. Could he be the man that does things? I mean, then we're talking about also Italy. There's some really talented Italian coaches right now. So yeah, lots for Juve to delve into. But in summary, Allegri has to an extent disappointed, and I don't know how much time he's got realistically, because I said this on our podcast, if this was Andrea Pirlo in the same circumstances, I think he would be sacked. The fact that he has got that prestige, he's won them championships in the past, I think that buys him time. But I would question, and I think Juve fans are starting to question, what is the identity of this team? Where are they going? And I think in the past, Allegri has kind of, kind of put it together, but without much thought. Whereas now he needs to put a lot more thought into what he plays, who he plays, and the style of football at Juve.
You mentioned about, right, rebuilding for Juventus. That's
Mm.
definitely right. It's just that you look at it 5 years ago when they were reaching Champions League finals. I think they reached a couple of
Yeah.
Champions League finals within 3 years, right? They had
Mm.
the team, they had the manager. It's just that when you buy a high profile player like Ronaldo and with the wages that he's on, it's not like Juventus are like one of the richest clubs in the world. It's not that. Like
No,
they
no.
don't they don't they cannot spend the money like with the likes of, and they cannot compete with the likes of City and PSG, right, for any kind of
Mm.
player. So if they are in the market, you basically you lose out to them, right? But what I'm trying to tell you is maybe Ronaldo's going is actually a blessing in disguise for Juventus, and with the money that they've gotten back. Again, if Ronaldo would have let, I just feel that if Ronaldo would have left in the summer, let's say that he just had like, hey, I'm done with Juventus and I'm going to leave, which we all knew was going to happen. But eventually he came out and said like, hey, I'm not going to leave it. I'm dedicated to my club and I'm going to work with them and all that stuff. But then in the next couple of days he just announced his transfer, that he's going to leave. Maybe in the next couple of years, Juventus has the money to take back and get into the transfer market and get the players that they want, so that they start their rebuilding again. I just feel like to call Allegri is not the man is not right. I think he's done really good things, and you cannot tell him, and we cannot sit here and say that he's not a great manager. I think he's a great manager. We all know that he's done good things for Juventus in the past as well. It's just that when a high profile player like that leaves, and when you don't have the backup, when you can't spend enough money on the other side of the team, then you obviously struggle, because you're like, yeah, why is Rabiot playing on the left wing? I agree with that. It's just that where, or like, who else are there in that team who can adjust and play with that role? And then again, we have this injury issues with Morata and Dybala all the time. Like they start a couple of games and then they get injured. So that's like the inconsistency. That's what I tried saying that in the in the
Yeah,
initial
no,
one.
no, it's a
It's
good
very
point.
inconsistent.
But what I would say then is there more question mark about the people above Allegri then?
Yeah.
So, I get your point about Ronaldo, and I think if we go into the Man United section, you build a team around Ronaldo because he's not the Ronaldo of when he was at Real Madrid, for example. So he's not going to chase down balls, right? He is there, though, however, from one perspective, scoring goals. So you shouldn't expect him to track back. You shouldn't expect him to do the step overs that he used to do. But the other part is he's commercially the signing. He was bought in because actually Juventus had that foresight to say, yes, we're going to spend X amount on his wages, but what he'll return in terms of global appeal as well as his shirt sales is going to be massive for the brand of Juventus. Let's put that aside. He's now gone. There would have been, I would have expected some conversations where Allegri knew that this move was going to be talked about. Now, I remember those weeks leading into it where there was murmurs of Ronaldo being offered to PSG, for example, but they didn't want him. So this is where the Man City conversation started to happen. By that point where you say, right, we agreed to move him on, there should have been straight away a conversation of who do we bring in? Who do we need to sign as a backup? There's a lot of players out there, even in Italy, that they could have bought, for example. So I'm thinking of their rivals in Torino, for example, Belotti, who came off that Euros, did relatively well, but as a target man, he does very well in Italy. Another man, previous player, Immobile, not a biggest fan of him, but he's a goal scorer in Serie A. He
Yes.
scores goals every season. So ultimately, this is the thing that you would have to say is Allegri would have had some sort of conversation. Then we have to kind of consider the deal that they did with Locatelli. So, for example, they bought him from Sassuolo. Good season, good player. I do rate Locatelli, but they didn't sign him. They brought him in on a loan. So that goes a lot to explain the financial situation that's going on at Juventus. We know about COVID, but yeah, we have to talk about the people above, the deals that they made for certain players. This is the reason why they can't ship off the likes of Aaron Ramsey, for example. They're struggling financially. Before it seems to me that they can do anything with a rebuild, they have to sell on players right now. And I think this is why there's a lot of conversations of, is Dybala really worthwhile kind of pursuing in terms of getting a contract? Because there's no doubt he's a great player when he's on his game, but his injury record is obviously one that is suspect right now. If the likes of, say, Newcastle was to come in and offer, say, 20 million, I'd snap it up right now. And I'd say, right, what we need to do is then look at something else in terms of getting something going on right now in that whole rebuild team. But I mean, if you compare that to the style that they had when they brought in the likes of Pogba on a free transfer, for example, like the strategy has completely disappeared. So something fundamental has happened at Juve that has meant this is going to take not just like 2 or 3 seasons to rebuild. It's going to be a multiple number of seasons before they can get Juventus back to its greatness. The one thing that they can clasp onto is Chiesa. Chiesa, if you sell him right now, you would expect somewhere in the region of at least 100 million plus. I think he's genuinely a talented bloke who is that generation kind of out of Italy right now. Question is, though, right now, who is that club that would stump up that cash? And I think we kind of said it, there's Man City, there's PSG, for example. Outside of that, I don't know. It's a real big question. I think this is the thing that Juventus have to kind of start thinking right now is, do you sell a talent like Chiesa to rebuild your whole team? Or do you keep hold of him and build a team around him? If it was me, I'd look at trying to build a team around Chiesa because I think, he seems like a grounded guy. I remember his dad playing for Parma, for example, and I think his roots are in Italy. But this is the modern day footballer now these days. So I think it is a question of what can you offer to Chiesa, and Chiesa will be ultimately driven by Champions League football. If Juventus fail to achieve that, then I think you would see him move on. And
Yes.
that's ultimately what would happen. So the whole Juventus thing is a bit like Man United. There's a lot of different circles, spinning plates right now. You have to kind of look at it and strip it back and kind of say, right, you need to get back to where we were. So how do we do that? So, like I say, this is not a one season job, but talking about Allegri very briefly again, he is responsible for the style of football. He is responsible for the results ultimately. I can forgive and say, yes, give him another season, but the style of football has been terrible. And while there's an element of players who are responsible for what they do in the 90-minute periods, there was periods of like various Juventus games I could quote, for example, like Empoli, where they lost 2-1, for example, earlier this season, where
Yes.
Allegri did not do anything in terms of a substitution until the 80th minute. Now, when you're like losing to a team like Empoli, you shouldn't be doing that at home. But that was their first ever win at Juventus in their entire history. So that goes to show you how far Juventus have fallen. And while this is kind of shockwaves in terms of this might not be a great season for them, they really need to start thinking about what they do in the future. And yeah, my thoughts would be start thinking about the process of who would you want in 5 years' time? Do you want Allegri there? I would question you, probably say his style of football isn't pleasing and
Yeah.
it's not the style to attract players in the future. That's
Mhm.
myself.
Okay. I think yeah, enough enough discussion on Juventus, but let's quickly touch on the other teams in Serie A as well. And the one team that I really want to talk about is there's this comeback king of in the name of Jose Mourinho, right, at Roma. I think it's just I think this can be definitely summarized really really quickly, but he's just having the same kind of problems, that Jose Mourinho and his recent teams have gotten. Right, he started the season well, but it's just a matter of one defeat where everything just goes downhill from there. Like, there's problems in terms of defense. Lack of a proper CDM is probably showing that for me. But what like really have you made up of Roma season up until now? And I think it's a long shot to call them being in the top four. It's just that though And the most recent game that blew my mind was that Bodo Glimt, where they lost 6-1 to them, and they again, I think they drew again, like at home. I was like, what's going on with that? Like, I think they were like, and I know like Bodo Glimt is like Roma, the Norwegian champions and all that stuff, but come on, like Roma is still Roma. They're like playing in the
Yeah.
top five European clubs, top five European leagues. They shouldn't be losing 6-1 to a club called Bodo Glimt. Probably, I actually even made a joke about it on Twitter and saying like they lost to a team who don't even know what their name is. Like they have Bodo slash Glimt. Like it's just funny how Jose Mourinho has fallen down the pack in terms of managerial performances.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say there's only one man responsible for that, and that is Jose Mourinho right now. And this is the Jose Mourinho meltdown that we're now seeing in a world record pace. So he's outdoing what he did at Tottenham. So whereas he had a few more seasons at Tottenham, he's reducing it. So Andy on our show said about how he's doing a world record because he did it in fewer seasons at Spurs in terms of, having this hobo look, blaming everything and everyone for the reason why his teams aren't doing so well. And you're seeing it at Roma. We warned Roma fans this would happen. Even our co-host Craig, who is also a Roma fan, he was a bit skeptical about what to expect this season because he's seen what he's done in the Premier League. Now, from the start, very promising. It looks rosy. You couldn't say anything bad about Roma. But since those early days, it's fair to say, I think it's questionable about his style of approach. And I think the other thing is you've got to kind of question when he starts blaming people and squads. I mean, the Bodo Glimt result, he automatically, after that result, said, I don't have a team. This is the reason. I let these second hand, my reserve players have a shot at this game, prove their worth. And he just threw them under the bus, basically saying, we need a whole new team. And this is a typical Mourinho tax. He obviously wants lots of money splashed out. Roma splash out a lot of money. Let's be
Yes,
brutally honest. They
yes,
spent a lot of money on Tammy Abraham, Shmorodov as well. They bought in. Um, you know, you can't say that he hasn't been given a chance. Even Rio Protuzio, who he bought from Wolves earlier this season as well. So he got his first choices in that respect. What you would have to say, though, is performances have been really lackluster. Now, you could, to a degree, blame it on the players, but ultimately, again, a bit like similar to the Allegri example, there's a man in charge of that style of football and a guy that's really experienced. He knows what to do. And you could say, some people will say, oh, but that's what he does. He tries to rile players and get a reaction. And if they don't play for him, then they shouldn't be in that squad. But that style of football has ended when you've got the likes of Thomas Tuchel, who could pick up a squad and in half a season win a Champions League with that team, without him having an input in terms of transfers. You do have to question the management, the philosophy, the style of a manager like Mourinho. I'm not to say, he doesn't still have it within him to be a good manager, but I think people are starting to see through him and what he does. And I think the documentary of All or Nothing on Spurs, for example, highlighted that maybe Jose Mourinho needs to have a hard look in the mirror and actually start looking at philosophies of football and stop thinking about his past glories. I think he's really alluded to that. What does it do for a team when you kind of hang out your reserve players, to say they're rubbish, no good for me? Like, no offense, that is kind of, it gives a bad message. And I think, yeah, we're starting to see more of the successful managers being people that, really take care of the players and their team. They get, even in those circumstances whereby a player is having a terrible season or terrible form, you don't see them being hang out to dry like Mourinho does. And it's very interesting. You kind of think, right, with a better coach, could this Roma team do better?
yeah.
And there's an element of me that goes, yeah, definitely. And you know what? this season's been really, I suppose, to an extent, been hanging on by Pellegrini. His form for
Yes.
them has been really phenomenal. He's
Yes.
been the best player in Serie A by a mile.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the thing. So you have got players in there that are playing well, but ultimately you have to kind of call out these tactical aspects. And you know what? Yeah, a bit similar to the Juve situation, but yeah, what you do find with Mourinho is you're going to be spending a lot of money. You know, whether that's his management team, whether it's the overall transfer budget. Roma knew what they were getting themselves into, and
Yes.
ultimately, if they didn't see the warning signs from Man United, from Spurs, then they're foolish. But there is an element of the Italian press and Italians in general that kind of hold on to this Inter Milan Mourinho. He delivered success at Inter Milan, and he's a legend at Inter Milan for that reason. But football has more than evolved these days, and I feel like with Mourinho, he's kind of stuck in his old ways. He's not prepared to revolutionize his style of football and his man management skills, which
Yes.
are questionable at times.
Yeah, I think that's well put, because I felt like, yeah, before the season started, as I said, like I felt like I gave them an outside chance to finish up in the top four just because
Mm,
of the Serie A, right? The
yeah,
way Serie A's played and how he plays, like how his tactics are, I felt like, yeah, I'm gonna give him a chance. And just because of the uncertainty in Serie A before the start of the season, now obviously now after 12 games, it's all becoming a little bit clearer, like who is going to be in the top four, who's going to be in the title race. But I guess like nobody expected what we're seeing right now in Serie A. So that's definitely, I think that's definitely gone. I think maybe a fifth or sixth place finish is possibly the best thing for Mourinho and
mm,
Roma for this season. That's probably just
definitely.
that's how I'm gonna put it. Yeah, let's just and quickly cover up this area, finish up this area roundup as well.
Mm,
But we know that we had this Milan derby last weekend.
yes.
I would admit it was a great match for a neutral fan. It was a great end to end game. I don't know how you felt. I know you're an Inter Milan fan, but do you see any two? Do you see these two title contenders? Sorry, do you see these two fighting for the title? These two teams, which is the Inter Milan and AC Milan, and we do see some cracks from both of the teams. Even
Yeah.
though AC Milan are unbeaten and they're level on points with Napoli at the moment, but when they play against the bigger teams in Europe, to be fair, they've not really done well
No.
in the Champions League at the moment. And then a couple of teams that I wanted to touch on as well is I think Hellas Verona and Fiorentina
Yes.
as well.
Definitely.
How did you feel? How do you feel in terms of these couple of four teams? Sorry, these four teams. Um, these four teams, how they've been doing in Serie A this season?
So we'll start off with the Milan derby. Milan, I suppose, have been phenomenal.
Mhm.
And what's interesting about Milan is the fact that they've also done it without the likes of Ibrahimovic and Giroud, the more experienced players, being the focal points for AC Milan. So they've got a solid kind of backline in Kier and, for example, Tomori, who's really stepped up his game this season. I think he's been phenomenal. But then in front of him, you've got a really fascinating midfield. So Benacer, for example, Tonali, there's some really interesting kind of blend of football that Pioli is trying to develop at AC. And then you look up top, and the likes of Rebic can only start from the bench these days because of the form of Rafael Leao, for example. And Leao, for me, has been the surprise of this season because last season he didn't have a really good season. We knew there was something in him from his Lille days, but more importantly, obviously, before that in Portugal, he was one of the kind of considered younger, bright, up and coming players. What you're seeing now is a really rejuvenated striker who maybe just needed time to adapt to Serie A. And outside of like the kind of top 10, I'd say, of strikers around the world, he's definitely hanging there or thereabouts now. He's really pushing in terms of that program. He just needs to work on his consistency. This is the only thing, because against Inter Milan, he was woeful in the sense of when he had chances, he, didn't have placement on the shots. He didn't get his head up enough. It's just that experience factor. So again, we have to say he's a young striker who's learning his trade, and by playing with the likes of Ibrahimovic and Giroud, that's going to obviously rub off him. It's going to help his game as well. So he's in the best possible place. Sorry. But AC Milan definitely title contenders. I think by the end of this season, it will be between them, potentially Napoli, potentially Inter. Um, so yeah, I think there's going to be a very interesting run up. I think what we saw in the Milan derby though was what was very interesting was Pioli got his tactics wrong. We've started to see a bit of edginess in terms of Milan, and he admitted after the game that he had to fix it in the second half, and he certainly did. Um, but yeah, I'd have to say Pioli's generally being quite spot on in terms
Yeah.
of his approach. I mean, if anyone wants to look at the game against Atalanta, that was a phenomenal win. And, although it was 3-2 in the end, the two goals that they did concede were very late on. So it's just one of those that I would say with AC Milan, sorry, very much on the road in terms of potential Scudetto title winners. I think for me, it's just a question of could they maybe reinforce in this next window approaching? There has been murmurs, though, financially, they're not the strongest right now.
Yes.
So they've been apparently talking about new contracts with certain players and asking them would they take a pay cut, which kind of demonstrates there is still that issue at AC Milan.
Yeah.
And should
And I
they
mean,
maybe move on Ibrahimovic? I think there's question marks about him. I mean, I see value in Ibra, but I would say could his wages, fund 3 or 4 players that could help the AC Milan squad. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I
very
think
interesting.
like even and that's the reason like there's this talks about Kessie moving on to someone
Mm,
like Newcastle, right? Because it's just the contract talks are not going well as he expected them. So there are problems with AC Milan, but at the moment I think in Serie A, I think they're doing pretty well.
definitely.
I'm pretty sure that they're out of Champions League contention. I don't think like they can, but I think they can maybe if they do defeat Atletico, I guess they can move it. They can move on to that round of 16. I think so. That's how it's gonna play out.
Mm.
Um, just quickly touching on Fiorentina and Hellas Verona as well. I know you wanted to touch on them as well.
Yeah, so more so on Hellas Verona. So briefly, they had a manager dismissed early in the season. They brought in Igor Tudor, who's an ex-Juventus legend. He was part of the Juventus backgrounds team for Pirlo last season, and he's been pulling out some amazing results. But the critical thing for listeners is really the fact of he's really given opportunities to the players that were on the peripheral of that squad. So the likes of Giovanni Simeone, who people might perk up their ears and go, Simeone, I recognize that name. Well, he is the
Yes.
son of the famous Diego Simeone.
Hmm.
And yeah, boy, is he pulling it off right now. Scored lots of goals recently, scored 4 against Lazio, for example. Been back to back in terms of consistency. He puts it down to watching Rocky films, believe it or not. So, yeah, I don't know if Rocky are planning to do any more sequels, but yeah, Sylvester Stallone is definitely in demand for Hellas Verona right now. But what's interesting is he's brought in a style of football that's a counter-attacking, but at the same time making them really attractive. And no one's actually having any bad words about Verona. What they're saying is, could this be the team that actually is the surprise package of the season? Could they be the team that actually makes a European spot?
Yeah.
Based on this form and the teams around them, they've got a hell of a good chance if they continue this momentum. I think the biggest question will be, will he get some funds going into the January window? And if he doesn't, then it's just managing that team in terms of the injuries as well. But yeah, hell of a squad. If we move on to Fiorentina, then really one man that signifies Fiorentina right now is Dusan Vajovic. Phenomenal number 9, shall we say. And his goal contribution has been really impressive this season. I mean, a number of his goals have come from the spot. So you could say, it's been a bit easy, but he reminds me very much of a Harry Kane in that
Yeah.
respect.
But he's
Very
still
good
been
on the ball.
The only thing
Go
I'll say, he's still been very inclusive in the attacks. If you, I mean, I don't know, how many people are actually following Fiorentina in terms of their game time,
Probably not a lot.
but not a lot, I guess. Yeah, but he's been doing good. Like in terms of involvements, he's been there. I
Yeah.
know, like as you mentioned, like his goal involvements are there from in terms of the spot kicks. But I guess like if you see his game and if you see what he's doing, then you won't say that, like, his statistics are only saying that he only scores goals from the penalty spots.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing I will say about him is that he seems to have blossomed since last season. So he had a good breakout season last season, and now he's really becoming that really kind of, I suppose, all together like forwards. I think he holds up the ball really well. He's very clever with his style of football, and yeah, just in general, he's really into it right now in terms of his form, and he's contributing to Fiorentina's success as well. The big question, though, is whether Fiorentina can hold on to him, whether that be in January or whether it'll be at the end of the season. For Fiorentina, I think financially it makes sense to sell him on. But again, the big question would be, who could they sell him on? Do you know what? He's the type of player that Juventus should really be going for. But the thing is, right now, I don't think they could afford him. And then, yeah, I can't see him going to the likes of, say, for example, PSG or Man City. So then that limits who he could go to. There was a lot of rumors potentially about him going to Arsenal recently, but his agent has kind of said, no, that's paper talk. So the other one that I did hear, which was very interesting, was Bayern Munich.
Mhm.
So obviously Lewandowski has talked about potentially moving on, and he did instigate it before the window shut recently, but it didn't happen. He seems to be quite happy at the moment, but there will be that long-term view of who's going to replace him, and I think he would be really good for Nagelsmann in Bayern Munich right now. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk of Spurs, for example. I could see Newcastle trying to make a bid. Whether they'd be successful is another question. I think for his career, he'd be better off staying in Fiorentina until the end of the season and then reevaluating it and seeing if another team would go for him. I'd love to see him at Inter. I think he'd be a great player at Inter Milan, but I think he could fit in a lot of teams. It's just a question of if they've got the money to really persuade Fiorentina. So I think it's going to be an interesting game in terms of managing that expectation and what the player wants. But he's definitely a talented player without a shadow of doubt. And yeah, taking him out of the equation, Fiorentina have been very solid this season. But you have to say, if you take his goals out of that team, then you do struggle. So
Yes.
that's the
Yes.
one thing I'd say.
Definitely. I think there's a really robust Serie A roundup that we did. Even though this podcast is all about football roundup, but I think we did a really detailed discussion on Serie A. But let's move on to the other league in Europe, which is Bundesliga, and for that I'd like to invite Chris Williams as well, who is a correspondent with the Busby Babe, and actually is working at, I think, Boston Globe as well. So welcome, Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on.
Great. So we just finished up our Serie A roundup, but we're going to move on to Bundesliga. Um, you know, we have to start obviously with Bayern Munich, because there are like I think they've already won Bundesliga for the 99th time, I guess. That's how that league is turning out to be. But we all know Bayern Munich are going to be champions. We all know that. But the match against Gladbach in the DFB Pokal actually raised some eyebrows, that maybe there are some issues that the club can exploit, that the clubs can exploit to defeat the Bavarian Giants. But how till up until this point, what have you made of Bayern Munich season, and what do you think are the Champions League hopes? Like, do you think that they are the ones to beat them? Because I, for one, I'm still going for Bayern Munich based on the play that they have. Yeah, their defense is something that can be talked about. I don't think Upamecano is having really that season that they bought him from Leipzig. But yeah, what have you made of Bayern Munich so far?
Yeah, so I think the DFB Pokal is the last thing that Bayern Munich really has to worry about. So I wouldn't really worry about a 5-0 defeat. I mean, obviously it was a huge upset and it's happened in the past as well. But I don't think it's really something that Bayern has to worry about. For every year that we go into the Champions League, they're always my favorite to win.
Mhm.
They play total football. The structure of that team has been the same for many years. Their DNA, their identity does not change. And the players that they have, they're some of the best in the world. And I think because they're so dominant, they're just so underrated. I was actually talking to one of my friends about this yesterday. We were talking about Lewandowski and Leon Goretzka and Joshua Kimmich, all of these players. They're still vastly underrated because they play for a team that wins almost everything that they play in. So like you don't really have to pay too much attention to the Bundesliga if you're in America or something because you just already know that Bayern's going to win. But they prove it time and time again on the European stage that they are the giants, they are the title favorites, and I don't think that's any different this year.
Adam, you have any thoughts on their Champions League hopes this time?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see them as favourites. I think this is thing with Bayern Munich. They seem to be this machine that carries on and develops their game. I mean, we all were in awe of what Hansi Flick did with that squad the last few seasons, but Nagelsmann seems to have progressed it and progressed that team as well. So obviously, we've had a few players move on in the summer. Obviously, you mentioned about Upamecano. They've obviously got Sabitzer as well from Leipzig.
Mm-hmm.
There's still that question mark, and this is something we mentioned on our podcast, is outside of that 11, they don't have that necessarily that quality on the bench that you would maybe associate with the Bayern Munichs that have done really well in the Champions League. So the Jupp Heynckes years have been phenomenal in terms of, having quality players on the bench to come on if that one player or the style of the game didn't go their way. So there is that question mark because I would say, yeah, Nicholas Sula is Bambi on ice. I don't like that guy. He's just, travesty in terms of a defender. But do you know what? They've got a phenomenal striker in Lewandowski. I love that guy. He's my bro in Poland. What would we do without him? But there is that question mark of what do they do? How do they progress it? They've got the right man right now. I think, in the Bundesliga, it's a completely different kettle of fish right now. It's almost an expectation with German fans that they will be the champions of the league. But the question mark is more on the teams below them. So the likes of Dortmund, for example, and, in recent seasons, maybe Wolfsburg, Mönchengladbach to an extent. The big thing for me, though, is they can't compete because Bayern Munich always seem to just absorb all the talent from these German teams and still, plow ahead. And it does feel a bit unfair and it is perceived as being boring. But if you watch the Bundesliga, it's actually really fascinating. It's really enjoyable sometimes.
Yes.
And results like this 5-0 in the Pokal, like Chris alluded to, they don't care. To be honest, I know they had a host of big names playing in that match, but
Yes.
Mönchengladbach are a good side as well. Like on the day, and Adi Hutter's actually done it twice. So he did it with Frankfurt the previous season, and Bayern Munich have got this history of not doing so well in a DPKL Pokal competition. So it's one of those that I think their aims for this season is the Bundesliga and the Champions League. In all honesty.
Yeah, definitely. I think I had my doubts when Nagelsmann actually came to Bayern Munich. I was like, I don't know if this guy is actually the one that Bayern Munich needed. It's just that they try to steal from the poor. That's what Bayern Munich does, and it just felt like it's not going to be that season. But I have been really surprised with how Nagelsmann actually approached and how he's handled the players and how he's been actually able to adapt to these. Sorry, given these give these players that time and actually adapt to the Bayern Munich system. When I see them in terms of attack, it just feels like, oh man, this is like I was talking to one of my friends like a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, I really want to see a game between Bayern Munich and Liverpool, just because of the style of play right now is just pretty similar. It's just their defense, Liverpool and Bayern Munich's defense, is not really great. I can see I can easily see a 6-4, 5-all, 6-all game easily. That game can be that. But yeah, we all know that's not gonna happen. Like even if they play in a Champions League final, because that's just a totally different game. But yeah, I totally agree with all of your points that you just mentioned. Um, let's move on to Dortmund. I know I've always said, and I guess Chris knows this. Sorry, Adam knows this as well. Before I've said that, I've said this in the past. That they're just a bunch of kids who really don't have any ambition of winning anything. I just feel like Dortmund for now really need to start approaching these leagues with ambition of actually winning them. They need like real superstars around them to win them something. They just cannot expect to sign these youngsters who are on the brink of becoming superstars and feel like, yeah, this will be the season where Erling Haaland will score 35 goals and we're going to win this. It's not really working for them. But what do you think do you think that something needs to change, or this is their business model and this is how they're going to be approaching Bundesliga?
Yeah, it kind of seems like they're the Ajax of Germany in a way, because I mean, last I could think, like 2013, they played Bayern in the Champions League final, and they had Lewandowski, they had Mario Götze, they had Gundogan, they had all of these talented players on that team, and then the next season, most of them were sold besides Marco Reus, So, and ever since then, they've kind of been bringing in these players, Christian Pulisic, Adnan Januzaj from United back in the day went there.
Yeah.
Jadon Sancho, all of these youngsters, Jude Bellingham, and it's kind of like it's their destination to develop and get some really good experience playing in Europe, playing in the Bundesliga, and then they go. So it kind of seems like their business model a little bit. And, it's done them well, but I guess they probably would like to compete seriously for the Champions League, for the Bundesliga. And in order to do that, you really have to retain your talent, don't you? So I don't know how they're going to be able to retain their talent. Like Erling Haaland, I mean, he has the whole world at his feet right now. He can go to any team in the world. So I don't really see him staying at Dortmund for the long run. I know his dad said that he's really happy there, and I would be happy there too. But he has the whole world at his feet. He can choose from all of the big clubs, and I'm sure that he will. So if they want to end up really competing with Bayern and the other big dogs in Europe, they're going to have to try to retain some talent and, do some serious recruiting and keep the players within their academy that they think are promising there. Marco Reus is just like an exception. He's been there for basically his entire life, loves Dortmund, and he'll never leave. So, I think they're going to have to get a lot more players like Marco Reus if they really want to keep him. So I don't really know what kind of change they have to make, because it just kind of seems like it's ingrained in them right now, kind of like Ajax. They accept that this is where these youngsters are going to come and develop, and they're very glad to send them on their way after they've prospered there. And, they'll go on their way to compete at the highest levels elsewhere. So, I guess we'll have to see what happens, but I don't really see anything changing.
So I'll just quickly answer Chris's question around Dortmund. They just need a defense. Every season, it seems to be the same issue of Dortmund and not having necessarily a team that can grind out results at the critical moments. Relying on the likes of Hummels, who has been depreciating in not just his value, but also in his ability terms. There's only so much you can rely on an experienced defender like Hummels to hold you up to your defense. They never really, I suppose, to an extent, when Hummels first left them for Bayern Munich, they never really kind of built on that Borussia Dortmund team. And I think, they brought in Marco Reus last year to extent to kind of bring in a change of where they've been, I suppose, to an extent, not winning stuff the way that they wanted to. So Lucien Favre obviously brought in a almost close season with Borussia Dortmund, but ultimately it's always been they can't grind out the results, they can't, do things. And they've had a big injury crisis right now. So Giovanni Reina's been out, Haaland's been out, Dahoud's been out, obviously Guerrero's been out right now. So there is some circumstances right now into explaining why they haven't been challenging potentially Bayern Munich and not pushing them a lot more. But at the same time, if they could potentially invest a little bit more in terms of having a team that could win something and build on that, then, they've got groundings of a, philosophy that they could build on going forward. Because like Chris alluded to, they seem to be this grounds for developing talent and then selling them on at a profit, which is great to an extent. But, if I was a fan, I'd be really frustrated, what other team could you say is very similar or akin to that, where they have had teams that you look at the past and you go, bloody hell, we had a hell of an individual there. And I remember the years when Lewandowski did break through. You still had Kagawa, for example. Mkhitaryan was only there or thereabouts, for example. Then you had before that Aubameyang as well, just in a kind of subs bench arena as well. So he was coming on. There's loads of talents you could allude to at Dortmund. But until they can master the one thing that Germany is really good at, which is defending, then, yeah, they just really do seem to struggle in terms of challenging. And I think the biggest thing that they need to kind of do is grind out a team that can challenge for the Bundesliga. Mm-hmm. Haaland's an interesting situation. Obviously, like Chris alluded to, expect him to move on. But this is the thing is, after Haaland, who they got in that team that could, provide some goals. And that's why you're seeing this Dortmund team really struggling right now, is they haven't thought about what happens after Haaland, who can contribute those goals. So, yeah, I think there needs to be that rethink. I think Marco Reus is the right individual, but it's going to take him at least 3 seasons, I think, to get the team where he wants it to be. I know there's murmurs of him bringing a few of the Mönchengladbach players across, which would be interesting because they're big rivals of each other as well. So yeah, big fascinating period for Dortmund, because I do see they're trying to change the philosophy and try and win things. Marco Reus is an up and coming manager. Question marks about whether they've got the right team in terms of player and personnel right now. I don't have any fears about, the younger generation coming through. I think they've always had a good grounding for that. But the biggest thing is, can they have a first 11 that can challenge for something? So, yeah, that's my thoughts. I think they just need to bring in the right personnel and look at Borussia Dortmund, not on this season, but next season. If Marco Reus doesn't deliver it by next season, then again, they're going to have to chop and change again.
Yeah. There's just there's a question from our viewer saying, I'm really surprised no big investor has put in lots of money in Bundesliga, as we've seen in the Premier League, right? But despite how the clubs function, their great talent and style of play, they need more competition. Anybody has any views on that?
Yeah, ultimately it's down to the ruling of the 50+1 rule in Germany, which essentially, I suppose, to the purists is why everyone loves the German Bundesliga. It stops the kind of, I don't want to call it tyranny, but this kind of investment into these kind of clubs.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's great to see a league kind of stand up and say, we're not going to do Monday night football. We're not going to abide by your rules and say, do this for the TV. And, it's interesting that you see even Bayern Munich fans holding out their board members more recently about them money laundering and, just making money out of the club. Bayern Munich aren't the most loved team when it comes to the German leagues, but Leipzig is the worst team considered by most German fans right now. And that is ultimately the reason. And I'm sure Chris could maybe add to it, but yeah, you will not see that investment because German fans are stuck in their belief that this is football. They don't care if Man City and PSG splash loads of money. That's not for them enjoyable. And yeah, there's a lot of arguments that they should introduce it, and I know Bayern Munich's board are trying their best to persuade that piece. But there's a really good thing that I heard a few weeks ago. Say it did got passed in terms of a legislation piece to say, investors can make decisions of the clubs. How much money would it take the likes of a Greta Thunberg to challenge the likes of Bayern Munich? And we're talking about the ability gap right now. But then how much money would then Bayern Munich on top of that spend to further enhance their team? So there is no equilibrium. There would never be that. And this is what you see the problem in the Premier League right now is you need billionaires, multi-billionaires to kind of own these clubs. And the amount of money that is ultimately lost in the game is on agents and all sorts of different other aspects in the game right now.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to watch in the Premier League, but at the same time, you go, wow, lots of money is lost, and that monopoly is going to end at some point, and it's going to be catastrophic. So this is why the murmurs of Super League happened, is because clubs have become greedy. They need more money. They need this, but they actually have lost their financial circumstances. They don't know where they are right now. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it for now.
You briefly mentioned about Leipzig. I think they got their man after Nagelsmann left, and from Salzburg in the name of Jesse Marsch. He's not had the best of starts, and he's not really. I haven't really found the Leipzig that I have seen in the last couple of seasons up here in this season, but he's slowly starting to find that rhythm against. I felt that in the last game that they played against Dortmund, I felt like he did not try to attack the ball too much, but he tried to sit back and then played the game from there. But what have you made of Jesse Marsch's reign up until now at Leipzig? And their most important player for this season has been Christopher Nkunku. I think he's been brilliant in front of goal. There's been talks of City signing him for that 6-month period because they really need him. But I don't see that happening. I feel like he still stays at Leipzig, and I still feel like he still needs another season at this kind of form to really classify him as a really, really good striker.
Yeah, I think it's too early for him to leave. Stay there, continue to develop in the Bundesliga, maybe for the rest of the season, and then maybe even next season as well. But yeah, he's a tremendous talent, and I can see why tons of teams want to sign him. But touching on Jesse Marsch now, I mean, there's a big step up from Salzburg to Leipzig, right? I mean, different country, totally different league with different competition. You have more talented players at your disposal. You're playing against more talented players. So there's going to be an adjustment period. There always is. You see this all the time with managers and even with players. So it should be like as expected that he was going to, experience some bumps in the road at the beginning of his career with Leipzig. But I think we're starting to see that he's going to turn it around. And I do think he's a really good coach. Yeah. He did tremendous work at Salzburg. He brought in a lot of young talent, and he produced a lot of young talent, and they were able to leave, flourish. So I really don't think there's going to be any problem with Jesse Marsch. He just has to prove himself at the big level now. He proved himself in Austria, and now he has to prove himself in Germany. I think he'll be able to do that, but he just needs some more time to do that.
Yes.
Just to add to that, I think you're right in saying he needs time. One thing with Jesse Marsch is I think the Bundesliga has taken him a bit by surprise in terms of the standard is a lot higher compared to obviously what he's used to in the Austrian league. What he did at obviously Salzburg is the ethics that they want to bring in at Leipzig, but you have to counteract that by they lost a few players in the summer. So Konate, for example, Upamecano and Sabitzer going into that later days of the window as well. So yeah, they're three big players that are very hard to recover from. And, there's a lot of expectation that Leipzig should be there or thereabouts in terms of challenging for the top four, or at least maybe challenging Bayern Munich. But when you have that, as well as their coach previously, Nagelsmann, that obviously built a philosophy with that team, then that's going to be taking a lot of time to recover. I think even the previous summer, obviously they lost Werner as well. So, it's been a combination of big names moving on, and you have to then sort of say, right, the likes of Yusuf Poulsen, for example, and Emils Forsberg, they have to up their games now and be the talismans for that club as well. But in Nkunku, very good player. I really highly rate him. That performance against Man City in the Champions League was, epic. Again, he did against PSG, showing them what they're missing right now, and the sense of they released him. And there's been a lot of talk about in the UK around the fact that maybe Klopp is looking at him as a replacement for, Mane potentially, and to an extent Firmino as well, because Firmino's goal return isn't great. So, I think he'd be great in that role. I can't see him going to Man City personally. But yeah, I could definitely see him at Liverpool. Just a question of if they could strike up the right amount of deal. What gets me, though, more to the point, is how this guy is not in the French team. I know there's a hell of a talented bunch in the French squad, and they've got defenders that could play for every team in Europe right now, because they've got so many of them right now. But Nkunku, just on form alone, should be at least on the subs bench. He should be there or thereabouts. And I know Didier Deschamps recently said he's on his radar and encourages him to carry on in the same vein. But when you've got a player that's on form, especially given the fixtures they had, he would have been a great opportunity to just test him out, see what he's about, and whether he could maybe make it into that national squad. But regardless of that, I think he will do well. And Leipzig, maybe not this season, but maybe next season you'll see him progress a little bit further with Marsh.
Okay. And touching on Leverkusen, I guess. I guess like they had this good season start last season as well when they were under Peter Bosch. They started well up until December, and then they just lost the plot from there. It's been the same kind of season for them as well. Like they started really good. I think they had about 4 or 5 wins in the first 6 or 7 games, and they were looking like the real deal. Even and I wanted to briefly touch on Florian Wirtz as well. I guess he had like a really terrific start to the season, but again they've fallen under the radar again. Like in the last 4 games, they've not had any wins. I think a couple of losses and a couple of draws as well. Obviously, one of them was with Bayern Munich with that first half. I don't know. I don't want to say that word, but yeah,
Collapse.
First half collapse that they had against Bayern Munich. But what have you guys made of Leverkusen, and do you think that they are going to be like challenging for that 4th spot? Because there are a couple of good teams over there as well. Like I guess like Mainz and Freiburg and Wolfsburg, who recently also sacked their coach in Van Bommel, and now they've started again. They started again. They're good form. But what do you guys make of those teams?
Yeah, so I think it's important to start off by saying that they're really not that far off of the top 4. They're not that far out of a place in the Champions League. They have 18 points, and they're in 6th place. And then you look at Wolfsburg, they're in 4th with 19 points, and Freiburg in 3rd with 22 points. So they're really not out of that mix at all. So I think they just have to continue playing the way they're playing, and they have a really realistic chance of qualifying for the Champions League and challenging for a spot in the top 4, potentially the top 3, because we know every year that the top 2 is pretty much going to be solidified with Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. But talking about Florian Wirtz, that kid is phenomenal.
Yeah.
When I was 18 years old, I wish I could play like him. 4 goals, 6 assists in 9 games is absolutely insane. 3 goals in the Europa League to send them into the knockout stages. And he's already playing for the German national team. So I just think he's an incredible player. Breaking on the scene kind of like Kai Havertz did, right? So it's really no surprise that teams like Barcelona and Chelsea and Real Madrid want him.
Yeah.
So they have a talented kid who can really help them, in the rest of the season. And I wouldn't expect him to leave in the January transfer window at all. Kind of like Nkunku, who's 18, has a lot of time. Keep developing there, keep playing with with Leverkusen. And yeah, we'll see where they end up, but I have confidence that they'll end up in the top 4. They usually do. They're always a solid team in the Bundesliga.
Yeah. And Adam, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, echo Chris's sentiments on just Leverkusen as well as Wirtz. Leverkusen, they're a bit disappointing. It wasn't just the Bayern Munich result. They had a bad result against Borussia Dortmund as well, where they lost. And that was a Borussia Dortmund side with a Haaland that was on fire as well. So that's what you have to caveat with that performance. But Leverkusen, I expect them to be in the top 4. Possibly in 4th place, but I think they're better equipped than some of the teams around them. So I know we're talking about SC Freiburg, who phenomenal season, and also Mainz very good as well. But I think just the experience will be telling here, and that's where I think they just have a little bit of an edge, where they can win those games like against Stuttgart, where they need to get those results, for example. And that's where I'd say that's where they'll do. On Wirtz, again, superlatives about the guy. I mean, there's nothing more you could say about him apart from stay at Leverkusen. Do not go abroad right now. I think he needs a couple of seasons, and I'm not saying necessarily to help his game, but I think, playing consistent football is what a player of his age should be doing. And if he does get opportunity to move on, unfortunately, I'm going to be an advocate of saying go to Bayern Munich, where you'll be guaranteed to progress yourself, but also play in the top games as well. If he was to be moving to the likes of PSG, I think he'll be a bit like that bit part player that is expected to do something, and when the form's not on his side, he may struggle. So for me, stay at Leverkusen or go to a team that will guarantee you game time. Do not go too far ahead of himself, but very talented guy. I look forward to his progress in the coming seasons.
Not Dortmund though. Not Dortmund.
Could be Dortmund. I'm not denying it. He can go to Dortmund as well. But I think he'd be better off at Leverkusen than Dortmund right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Okay, we're up almost 1 hour and 17 minutes. I would probably would want to continue more and talk about Premier League action as well. But I guess we'll just touch briefly on the new managerial appointments and no more than that. But I guess Steven Gerrard is back in the Premier League. That was a surprising move for me. I don't think I ever heard any kind of rumors for him coming back to the Premier League and managing Aston Villa. But he got so he's the new manager at Aston Villa. The manager Dean Smith, who got sacked at Aston Villa, is now the manager at Norwich City, who obviously won their first game after a long time in the Premier League. It just feels like after a long time, but they sacked Daniel Farke now, and Dean Smith is in charge, and Eddie Howe is officially in charge at Newcastle as the new manager, with almost, I think, 3 players available to him that he previously managed at Bournemouth. But just briefly touching on these appointments, do you guys feel like these are good appointments for their respective clubs? And what do you make of specifically, Villa, Norwich, and Newcastle?
I'd say in terms of every individual that you've spoken of, I think they're an upgrade on what they had previously. So if we start off with Newcastle, because that's nice and easy, Eddie Howe is definitely a big upgrade on Steve Bruce. He'll get a philosophy of attacking football, which is what their fans want right now. And he's a manager that I think could build something in Newcastle. And that is even saying it if they were to be relegated. I think he'd be the man to bring them back up. With the right funding, I think he'd get the right team as well, because I think he's got a hell of a job, because not only is he going to try and change the style of football, but the right personnel need to be there. And I think, yeah, you could argue that Newcastle are lacking in that department. So that's just through years of, underfunding, and the fact of Mike Ashley was in charge, didn't care about the club, didn't care about the fans, and ultimately just wanted to sell at a profit. So yeah, definite upgrade. In terms of Norwich, I'd say Daniel Farke, for me, isn't necessarily the blame of why they've been doing so badly. I think you have to question some of the players they bought in. Now, question marks has to be, were they Farke signings or were they the club signings? Because they spent a lot of money, but in terms of upgrade of the type of players, were they necessarily good? I mean, Sargent, sorry. I don't feel like he came in with a good record. I mean, he wasn't prolific when he was at Wolfsburg, for example. So I didn't expect him to score goals. So, Norwich need a goal scorer in that league. Timo Pukki can score goals, but they needed a quality player that can also take the burden off Pukki. So, yeah, for me, Farke was always about expansive football. He never got it right at the back, and ultimately he's being sacked because of the fact that he didn't get them playing a probably more, I don't know, I'd say in terms of style of football, he needed to be a bit more wiser. He just needed to make sure that his teams were a bit harder to beat, and ultimately he's been sacrificed because of that. Again, Dean Smith, I think, will do a good job. Big question marks of, is he being brought in because, there might be that kind of view that they will go down, so he's the man to bring them back up.
Yeah.
The other aspect is, could he bring in the right type of players in the January window? Hard to say. It depends on how much Norwich want to fund him, because notoriously Norwich are very tight in terms of the budget. So the fact that they spent so much in the summer window sort of suggests to me they probably won't have a lot of money unless they ship out players. And to be brutally honest, there might be one or two players that could be sold on at a high price, like Max Aarons, for example, Todd Cantwell as well. But beyond that, I can't see many of their players moving on. So yeah, I think this is more of a long-term strategy than it is a short-term remedy as well. And then if we move on to Stevie G, so I think fantastic for Aston Villa. Our co-host Craig, who's a Rangers fan, is gutted to see him move on. I think if we're talking about Stevie G, is that good for his career? I'd question it personally, because he could have been staying with Rangers, guaranteeing himself another title win. He get experience with Champions League football from next season, because Scotland have the automatic place. So therefore, he could have built up that team, got that experience there, because we know his dream role is Liverpool. We know Klopp's contract ends in 2024. So arguably you could say he's got another few more seasons to build up his CV, to show to Liverpool's hierarchy that actually he's got the credentials of handling a big job. Rangers are a big team. I'm not disputing Aston Villa isn't a big team, but the aspirations are kind of different. And I know people slag off SPL for being easy because there's only two big teams. But ultimately, and this is the thing with the Old Firm derby, is the fact of, beyond that, you have to get those players motivated to turn inside out and be there from a Tuesday in a, say, Europa League match to then being in the league as well, for example. And I know I said Tuesday, it should have meant Thursdays, but more to the point, it's about European football, then league. You have to be motivated and consistent. And that's what I suppose with Stevie G, he made sure they were consistent. They had a standard. There is doubts about his man management as well, to be fair, at Rangers. There's been arguments that he has been lacking in that department. So big move for Stevie G, let alone for Villa. So Villa, I expect him to do well. But in terms of expectation, I know Villa want to be in the top six. Realistically, I'd say 8th, 9th is probably the best that they can achieve for right now. And unless he's been guaranteed a lot of money going into the following seasons, and being told that they will be targeting the big players and not players that he wants to bring in, but they then go to the third and fourth options, then you could say maybe it's been a good choice. But then I would question whether Liverpool would then want to go to a rival like Aston Villa and get a manager from them to then turn up. I mean, he'll be loved by Liverpool fans always for what he was as a player, but as a manager, he'll be more scrutinized in the Premier League because Liverpool fans will see what to expect from him. And do you know what? I feel like he'd be better off at Rangers. But good move by Villa. I think that's definitely an upgrade on Smith. But long term for Gerrard, is that the right move? Question marks.
Yeah, yeah. Upgrade on Smith. I wouldn't want to say that like right away, just based on as you correctly pointed out, right? Like where he was managing, it's a totally different league, and for the last 2 seasons, he's not really had any competition. The competition that he had was in the European competitions. I guess like he did okay. I wouldn't say that he did really, really well. I said he did. I guess he did okay-ish in the European competitions as well. But I would like to see more. I would like to see how he transforms this team, because I guess like there was a lot of money spent on Aston Villa this season as well, just to get them back as a team together. I couldn't see that in this season with Dean Smith at the helm.
I think
That
they
was
did good business, though. This is the thing. They did really good business. And I think the expectation was, right, we've got this Grealish money. We brought in the likes of Danny Ings, for example, an upgrade on what they had beforehand. But what you have to say about Dean Smith is he was very reliant on certain players, for example. So, he brought in the likes of Ollie Watkins and Konsa from Brentford, for example, and he seemed to be constantly kind of alluding to his previous teams. So in that respect, that's where I'd say he's an upgrade, because Gerrard isn't reliant on previous players or previous teams, for example.
Yeah.
But the other thing you have to say is what he did with Rangers in Europe was phenomenal, because, he played against the likes of Benfica that are doing so well in the Champions League right now, and he pulled off some big results. Bear in mind, this was the first time Rangers have been in Europe for a number of seasons.
Yeah.
So this is the other element you have to say, that although you could say, yes, it was very easy for him in the SPL and he didn't have much of competition in Celtic, that's what we're pointing out to. They went unbeaten last season. That's a phenomenal how teams do that is phenomenal, and that's down to the man management skill. The one thing we will say, and I will point this out though, is the backroom staff of Stevie G that he's brought from Rangers across to Villa. So that is going to be really the pinnacle point about how Gerrard maybe progresses with Villa. There's a lot of credit to Michael Beale, who's in the background of Rangers. Obviously, Gary McAllister being his right-hand man as well. There's a lot of different elements in that backroom staff that are real contributors towards how Rangers did. But yeah, Stevie G, you have to remember he's still progressing as a coach.
Yes.
So I'll leave it at that, because I know Chris needs to have a say as well.
No, I'm basically just going to echo everything that you said. It's pretty hard to follow all that up. But yeah, I totally agree about Steven Gerrard. I was pretty shocked when I heard that he was moving to Villa, especially because, he can compete in Europe this year. And that's obviously the biggest test, right? If you want to become the Liverpool coach, well, you have to be successful in Europe. So you have a very strong Rangers side. He's developed them. He's got them playing the way that he wanted. So implement that in Europe, see how you can play against other big teams. And then maybe after this season, then you can make the move to the Premier League. I'm not saying to a really big club, but to the likes of Aston Villa. I just think everything happened so quickly. I was actually pretty surprised that they sacked Dean Smith. I mean, yeah, it was a poor run of form, and they lost the last 5 games. Their last win was against United in September, late September. But I think that Dean's probably would have turned it around. I think he's a fantastic manager for a team in the Premier League that's the same level as a Villa. I think he's a fantastic manager for someone like that. And the fans absolutely adored him, and look at what he did, bringing them all the way back to the Premier League. Jack Grealish said no manager will ever compare to him. So I think that's a really good appointment by Norwich to bring him in, because I mean, he's just so revered by everyone, and it's for a good reason, because
Mm-hmm.
he did tremendous work at Villa. And now, when you look at Stevie G, it's just it is really interesting. I'm not too sure how he's going to do in the Premier League. Like Adam alluded to, he didn't really have much competition in Scotland, and in the Premier League, obviously, you're going to have arguably the most competition you could have anywhere in the world. So it'll be really interesting to see how he's going to do. Yeah, and it is good that he's bringing the backroom staff. He'll be able to implement the style that he wants. They did bring in a lot of players this summer, so we'll just have to see how they're going to do. But now, going over to Eddie Howe, I'm also really intrigued to see how he does,
Yeah.
because I think it's a very interesting signing, specifically given the fact that Newcastle's just taken over and they have all of these really big ambitions, right? They have these big ambitions. They have all the money in the world that they could possibly ask for now. And they brought in Eddie Howe, who's a great manager by all means. But I'm intrigued because they want to bring in all these superstars, right? But you're bringing in a manager who's never really had to deal with players of that magnitude before. But he's really good at bringing in young players, improving them, selling them. So maybe he can do that now and then start to build, and make it a real project. But he was obviously fantastic for Bournemouth. They played 5 seasons in the Premier League under him, but they never really truly competed in the way that you would want to in the Premier League. That they were impressive at times, and everyone gave him credit. But I was actually looking up his stats under Bournemouth, and he only had a 40% winning percentage with Bournemouth between 2012 and 2020. And ideally, you would probably want a little bit more than that, especially at such a big project as Newcastle. So I'm really intrigued to see how he does, especially if they're able to bring in some big names that believe in whatever project they're trying to put together. But I think for now, he's definitely an upgrade on Steve Bruce, as Adam said before. And I feel bad for Steve Bruce, the hate that he was getting publicly, but I do think that Eddie Howe is miles ahead of him in terms of management. So it's a good appointment for now, but once you start to get into the project and you're bringing in all these players, if they're actually able to, I'm really interested to see how he's going to do with players that he's never really managed before, of that kind of standard, that kind of magnitude. They want to bring in superstars. So, yeah, I think it's a very exciting time to be a Newcastle supporter, and it's just a very exciting time in the Premier League in general with all these changes being made.
Okay, I would probably suppress my thoughts on Stevie G. For tomorrow, I'm doing a podcast with a Villa fan, so I guess I'll do some real good detailed analysis on him. So obviously stay tuned for that as well. But for this podcast, I would leave it at that. Thank you, Chris and Adam, for your time. I know I went a little bit overboard on time's sake, but thank you so much for coming on to the Late Winner Show, talking about Serie A, Bundesliga, and a little bit about the Premier League as well. Thank you so much.
That's right. Anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Right. Before we do log off, please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to the Late Winner Show. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Road to 300, as I always say, is begun. It's a very small number for us, but yeah, keep showing us the love that you've still given us. Keep hitting those like buttons. Definitely helps us with the YouTube algorithm as well. And as I mentioned in the start of the episode, this podcast will also be available as an audio by tomorrow. So definitely stay tuned and listen to it on your favorite streaming platform. With that, I'll again thank Adam and Chris. And let's do that. Let's do this one more time, but definitely really, really, really soon. All right. Thank you and good night.
Take care.
Good night.